In 2005, a quiet American town was shook by a terrible event. A young woman disappeared without a trace from her house, leaving all her belongings, her phone, and her car. Over time, the investigation of this case started to resemble a typical detective show, with only one difference. It all happened in real life. The small town was plunged into an atmosphere of fear and mistrust because any of the residents could have been involved in the disappearance of the woman. And the whole world learns the terrible truth only 12 years later. Tara Grinstead was born in 1974 in Hawkinsville, USA. During her school years, she actively participated in beauty contests, winning prizes. From an early age, the girl set herself a goal: to get a good education. So she saved the money she earned from competitions to pay for her education. After college, Tara got her Master of Science in Education and got the job she had dreamed of. She became a history teacher at a high school in Ocilla, Georgia. This tiny town was a typical low-rise America. Its population didn't exceed 4,000 people, most of whom knew each other very well. Life there was quiet and dull. None of the local residents would have thought that some serious crime could occur in Ocilla. Tara Grinstead had worked at a local school for several years, and during that time, she had developed an excellent rapport with both colleagues and students. She was a kind and sociable person who would always support you and help you. In October 2005, this help was much needed for Tara's students who were preparing to participate in a local beauty contest. Given the fact that their teacher had repeatedly won prizes at events like that, the girls were delighted to have her support on their side. On Saturday, October 22nd, Tara helped her students with the final touches before the competition. After that, she went on a picnic with her high school friends and didn't return home until 11 p.m., having parked her car outside under an awning. Since then, Tara has stopped picking up her phone. Her mother, who lived in another city, was worried the most. Her daughter always answered the phone or called back, but this time, she didn't get any answer. On Monday, October 24th, anxiety reached its peak. Tara didn't show up for work. This behavior was extremely unusual for her. The woman was serious about her work and would definitely warn her superiors that she needed a day off. Tara's worried acquaintances called Police Chief Billy Hancock and asked him to check if she was okay. At 10 a.m. the same day, he went to her house. The policeman believed that the woman's phone was simply out of battery and she either got sick or just overslept. After arriving at her house, he found Tara's car in its usual place. Her doors were unlocked, but Billy wasn't surprised. In such a small town, residents weren't worried at all that their cars might be stolen. After that, he noticed that there was an envelope with $100 in cash on the dashboard of her car. It was already weird. How could such a responsible person like Tara leave her money in such a conspicuous place? Billy knocked on the door, but no one answered. After that, he decided to inspect the house. At first glance, everything was perfectly fine. No signs of a struggle or a break-in. But in Tara's bedroom, the detective saw a complete mess, completely unusual for this woman. Her things were lying on the floor, including the clothes she wore when she was last seen. Her phone was charging on her bedside table. Everything looked as if Tara had left the house for a while, but she was nowhere to be found. On the ground near the house, the police found the first piece of evidence that made them think about a possible crime. There was a latex glove that someone could use to hide fingerprints. The detectives didn't consider the theory that the glove could belong to Tara herself. Almost no one used gloves like that in their everyday lives. Since then, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation became involved in the case. They were like the FBI, but at the level of just one state. The main theory of the investigation was kidnapping. There was very little evidence. In addition to the glove, the detectives found only two suspicious things. Tara's torn chain was lying on her bedroom floor, and her alarm clock wasn't in its usual place. But all of this absolutely didn't help detectives to unravel the mystery of her disappearance. For this small town, that Monday was truly awful. Tara's house was cordoned off, and a meeting was held at the school. Tara's colleagues and students tried their best to help in the search, forming a group of volunteers. They printed a stack of leaflets with a photograph of the woman and all the information about her disappearance, and in the next few hours, these pieces of paper were posted all over the city. On that day, the volunteers didn't go home until 1 a.m. The officers of the Bureau of Investigation interviewed Tara's neighbors and studied the area where she lived. Sniffing dogs took part in the search. They were brought there to hopefully take the trail of the missing woman. The investigators hoped that Tara had simply walked somewhere and the dogs would easily find her. At the same time, the latex glove was given to experts whose goal was to collect as much data as possible. They managed to take a DNA sample, but they couldn't find any matches in the FBI bases. All that was known was that the sample belonged to a man. Alas, all of this didn't bring any results. Tara seemed to disappear from her own house. Then the investigators started to delve into Tara's personal life and past. It often happens that when a woman disappears, someone from her inner circle is to blame. After looking through the men Tara used to date, the detectives still couldn't identify a single suspect. She dated Marcus Harper the longest. He was a former police officer and served in the military. The couple broke up because Tara wanted it about a year before her disappearance. The reason was that the woman wanted to build a family, and Marcus wasn't ready for this. They stayed friends after breaking up, called each other, and texted each other. Later, detectives found out one interesting detail. Marcus came to Isilla 3 weeks before Tara disappeared, but he didn't tell her about it. Having learned about Marcus's arrival from their mutual acquaintances, the woman was very upset. She called him repeatedly, trying to find out why he didn't tell her about his arrival. Soon, Tara became absolutely hysterical. Her family was very worried and even asked if Tara was going to do something reckless. However, the woman soon collected her wits, and the police didn't consider Marcus as a suspect. The couple was together for a long time, but their relationship ended, and the detectives couldn't find any motives for the crime. They soon discovered an interesting fact. The police learned that Tara had been threatened by her former student. On March 30th, 2005, 7 months before the woman's disappearance, he came to her house and behaved extremely aggressively. When Tara refused to let him in, the guy started pounding on the door, and the neighbors had to call the police. It turned out that the young man had been in love with his teacher since school. According to her acquaintances, the former student was emotionally unstable, behaved in a weird way, and was even frightening. For a while, Tara tried to help him sort out his problems, but his mental state only worsened. After that incident, when the young man tried to break into her house, the woman filed a report against him. She was seriously afraid that he might do something to her. After Tara disappeared, the police tracked down this young man. He worked in a nearby town 93 miles away from Isilla. The guy provided detectives with an alibi for the night of the disappearance of his former teacher. It wasn't possible to establish his involvement in the case. In the woman's house, they also found a business card of some policeman. It turned out that Tara had been dating him for some time, but at the time of her disappearance, he was already living in another city. The policeman also provided an alibi for the night of Tara's disappearance. This is where the list of possible suspects had basically ended. Not having any leads, the police decided to organize a search for the woman 2 weeks after the disappearance. It was weird that they made this decision so late, because it was clear from the very first minutes that Tara had left the house against her will. Hundreds of volunteers were involved in the search, scouring the outskirts of Ocilla. The volunteers searched the forests, checked out the ditches and rivers, but they couldn't find a single trace of Tara. During the search, it was reported that a house and car had burned down near Tara's house. Local residents almost unanimously agreed that the incident had something to do with the disappearance of the woman. Perhaps the criminal was trying to cover his tracks. Or were people so shocked and scared that every incident seemed suspicious to them? In any case, the search didn't bring any results, and the police were faced with a grim reality. They simply had no leads left. The next few years didn't bring the police closer to solving this mystery. It was only in 2009 that something took place that once again drew attention to the disappearance of Tara Grinstead. An unknown user created a YouTube channel and posted an extremely blood-curdling video. A man was sitting in the video. His face was blurred and his voice was changed. In the video, he stated that he was involved in the disappearance of 16 girls, calling them by their names. Among them was Tara Grinstead. The unknown user added that he had safely hidden the bodies and that he would give some clues about their burial places in the new videos. The police immediately checked the video and found that all 16 names really belonged to missing women. The FBI was able to quickly track down the author of this video. It turned out to be 27-year-old Andrew Haley. After his arrest, he stated that he just wanted to joke around. The police were unable to establish Andrew's involvement in the disappearances of those 16 women, but he still couldn't escape the trial. For providing false testimony and falsifying evidence, the man was sentenced to 2 years of forced labor and a probationary period of 13 years. The fleeting hope of solving this cold case disappeared, and the police were once again left without a single lead. In December 2010, Tara Grinstead was officially declared dead, as there was simply nothing to work with. Years passed, but the residents of Ocilla still remembered the disappearance of Tara Grinstead. They remembered, but talked about it less and less. Conversations about Tara happened only behind closed doors. The topic practically didn't come up in everyday life. The town had changed forever. Fear and mistrust were in the locals' hearts for many years to come. It wasn't until 2016, when something happened, that made people talk about Tara again. Atlanta-based journalist Payne Lindsay created his own podcast dedicated to mysterious cases, and for his first edition, he took up Tara Grinstead's case. The man and his colleague arrived at Ocilla, where they met with private detective Maurice Godwin. Together, they started working on this case basically from scratch. They didn't have access to the police documents, so the residents of the city became the only source of information. At first, they managed to talk only to the friends and relatives of Tara. Strangers always avoid talking about the missing woman, but this didn't last long. Lindsay's enthusiasm revived the interest in this case, and soon the people of Ocilla started to talk about it again. Lindsay and Morris worked out every possible clue. They looked at 3 possible suspects: Tara's ex-boyfriends and the students who tried to break into her house. They talked to everyone along the way, everyone who could have at least some useful information. They were so passionate about this case that a couple of times it seemed like the solution was literally one step away. One day, Lindsay received a call in which an unknown person suggested looking for her remains on the territory of Tara's house. The police did just that, and at one point, they managed to find bones. However, the experts quickly established that those bones belonged to an animal. Despite the excitement and a new wave of interest in this case, no serious progress had happened. At least, they didn't manage to solve this case during the creation of their podcast. But it was this amateur investigation that would become pivotal in finding out the long-awaited truth. And the truth came to the surface absolutely unexpectedly. In early 2017, a woman named Brooke Sheridan came to the police. Her story shocked the detectives, who no longer believed that the truth would ever surface. Brooke told investigators that her ex-boyfriend, named Bo Dukes, once confessed to her he helped his friend get rid of Tara Grinstead's body. Upon learning of this, the woman repeatedly begged the guy to confess everything, but he remained silent. The police weren't in a hurry to proceed after listening to Brooke's story. Who knows? Maybe this woman just wanted some fame and attention, especially when a successful podcast got everyone talking about the case again. The detectives decided to play it safe and asked Brooke to put on a wiretap and go to Dukes to get a confession out of him. It worked. The man didn't deny his involvement, and the police had grounds for arrest. To their surprise, Dukes immediately started cooperating with the investigation and told them everything he knew. Later, the detectives would say that he was simply tired of living with this burden. Late in the evening, he received a call from his friend and former classmate, Ryan Duke. He asked me to borrow my truck and help with something, and then added, "I broke into Tara Grinstead's house to steal some money, but things didn't exactly go according to my plan, and I killed her." According to Ryan's story, he went for a drive after partying with his friends. At that moment, he decided to get into someone's house and steal some money, and his choice fell on Tara's house. At that time, he was under the influence of banned substances. Opening the door with the credit card, he entered the house and started looking for money. Tara noticed him. A fight ensued between them, and only Ryan was the one to stay alive after that. When Dukes drove his truck to Tara's house, they loaded the woman's body into it and drove it into the woods. The two of them were getting rid of the body for several days. This story shocked the residents of Ocilla. Duke and Duke were never considered as suspects because they simply had no motive. There were no clues that could connect these two with the disappearance of the woman. Despite his full confession, Bo Dukes didn't testify against himself in court. During the trial, he spoke to Tara's relatives, cried, and asked for forgiveness for what he'd done. Dukes spent a long time in the Army, was a veteran, and received many awards, but the court made its decision: 25 years in prison for helping to conceal the crime. As for Ryan Duke, his trial is dragging on to this day, 4 years after his arrest. This is mainly because of the lawyers using various loopholes to postpone the inevitable. There is no doubt that Ryan will be in prison, but when exactly the court will announce its final verdict is unknown. Now that the truth about this well-known case has surfaced, Tara Grinstead's friends and relatives finally got rid of the burden of the unknown. Her mother admitted that all these years, she had secretly hoped for a miracle that her daughter would return to her alive. Alas, the reality turned out to be cruel, meaningless, and devoid of any miracles. At least now, the whole world knows exactly what happened in that small town back in 2005.